Hello, my friends. It's good to be with you. Salamun alaikum. I think Iran is an interesting country. It's unlike any country that I've ever been to. I have been to Muslim countries. And in a way, Iran has some of the craziness, some of the chaos of these other Arab countries. And Iran is not an Arab country, but it is very, very much a Muslim country in that part of the world. So I don't think many of you might have experienced that sort of low-level chaos that you experience in these countries of West Asia, what they used to call the Middle East. And Iran similarly reflects that kind of low-level chaos. It comes out in the people on the road, the busyness of the markets, the frantic nature of the driving, which is often perceived as dangerous, but you don't see a lot of accidents, fortunately, in Egypt, neither in Egypt and nor in Iran. But I think the terrible driving is kind of like the same. But when I say terrible, I mean there's just so many people on the road that the regular calm and system and order that you find in a Western city or a westernized city is just not there. People are just having to use the rules as guidelines and not as rules. The rules of the road. Okay, so let's just get to some serious things. So Iran, very, very, very much a Muslim country, and with all the amazing features of a Muslim country. I've been to Muslim countries, and there's certain things that make me glad I am a Muslim. I am a Muslim, and those of you who are ex-Muslims watching this channel, right time for you to say good night and bye-bye to you. The Muslim countries have a special thing in them, and let me be specific. First of all, the absence of vulgarity. I don't see that kind of sexualization and that absolute way in which women are vulgarized into sex objects. I don't see it. And it's absent in Iran, and it's absolutely amazing, refreshing thing to see. That women are women. They look attractive, they look beautiful, they dress well, but they are not sexualized objects. And the media, the mass media, the corporate media, they are not using women to sell razor blades and to sell anything from a car to a bag of cement. And my friends, I'm absolutely delighted that Iran is squarely sort of similar to Egypt and to some other Muslim countries in that way. It's the non-sexualization of women, the absence of vulgarity. And having been 10 days there, I can tell you that you become, it's a relief. It's almost a relief. All right. So that leads me to another point, and that is the absence of the corporatization of business, of the over-corporatization of business. Now, I live in a country, South Africa, where business is extremely highly corporatized. In South Africa, every possible area of the economy is monopolized by a small number of highly powerful oligarchs and individuals. And these powerful oligarchs, because of the immense power they wield, because of the monopolies they control the food distribution, they control the construction industry, they control the chemical industry, they control the mining industry, they control agriculture. Because of their high level of power, they control over the centers or the key areas of power in the country. They exercise immense power over the ruling establishment, also the political establishment. And it's not strange to you who are in Britain or in the US that that is exactly what happens. Now, in Iran, you find, yes, they do have a deep state, and I will get to that, but what is absent is the absolute monopoly or corporatization of every aspect of the economy, which has a knock-on effect. It means that wealth simply gets distributed wider. It's a flat structure of society, so the economic structure is very flat. You see, instead of having four highly pyramidic, I don't know how to say that, pyramid structures, these big corporations with their pyramid structures. You have basically a government, and you have an importation sector, which is mostly the government, and then you have the distribution. Retail is basically a completely flat structure. So in any sphere of the economy, retail is generally in the hands of what they call the bazaris, the ordinary traders, and businessmen. And with the result that you have a much, much better redistribution of the wealth. Right? Now, that brings me to the next point. Because there's no monopoly capitalism in the country, there's free market, real free market. Remember, corporate capitalism is not free market. It's controlled by a few, but that is a truly free market. So because of that, there's another spin-off, and complete absence of rank and, very severe poverty. So I've traveled a bit there, and in the main city also quite substantially. Maybe one or two people approached me, by the way, to ask something. I don't know what they were asking me. They didn't want money. In one case I offered, and that wasn't what they wanted. So I'm not, I don't understand the language. I'm not able to speak the language, but I can tell you this, that the amount of abject poverty that I'm familiar with in this country, which is a so-called free market Western economic system, there's no comparison. There's no abject poverty. I wasn't in the rural areas. I wasn't in deep, corners of the city, back areas, and but I can tell you, I've seen quite a bit, and I don't see, in my city, Cape Town, the poverty is very obvious. You just have to drive from the airport to the main city, and you'll see it. You'll see the shanty towns. You'll see the makeshift houses. You'll see the tents. In the center of town, you'll see people living in little tents there. And I've seen the same for other cities like California, like Los Angeles. So that is absent there. So, the lack of monopolization of the economy, the lack of, the redistribution of wealth, it does have a favorable effect. And so I'm going to stick my neck out and say that absolutely they have succeeded in avoiding the pitfalls. Right. Now the next point that also leads on from those, because of the lack of absolute poverty, the lack of abject poverty, of dehumanization, there is less mental illness around. There is an absence of that type of mental collapse, mental breakdown. So I don't see, there's no mass shootings that I'm familiar with, unless it's people paid by Mossad or the US or CIA. There's no obvious graffiti around. Yes, here and there somebody wrote a message, but it's isolated on the wall. There's no, road rage, and these are all signs of mental problems in a Western society. It's where stress levels, where contradiction between people's hard work and their rewards is just not, it's very, very prevalent. And I can honestly say to you, all of these factors are related. The redistribution of wealth, the lack of poverty, the lack of sexualization of people, and the lack of mental illness, they're all connected. And so those are the things pretty much that I also find present in a country like Egypt, although the governments, the control in both these countries are very, very different. That's where I want to move to next. So the control, the political establishment of Iran. Iran is a country that is about I think, 45 years old, the founding of the Islamic Republic as it is at present, this current political structure or system of the country, which is called a system of wilayatul faqih, the guardianship of the knowledgeable or the educated people or the jurist. That kind of structure has been around since the revolution, which was in 1979, I believe. And it was the founder of the revolution, Ayatollah Imam Khomeini, who instituted the structure where the religious expert becomes the highest leader. Now, Egypt, of course, has a mixed, and I can't help drawing the comparisons, and I think it's interesting also, and it's enriching to look at it, because you see, Egypt, Iran, Pakistan, and these are all countries that are highly Islamic in their commitment to the religion of Islam, right? To the Qur'an also, they do make a outward commitment. And so we have to look at how Islam, how the Qur'an, this is a channel about Qur'an, so we have to see how the Qur'an is implemented or is made to come, brought to bear on society. Iran has a very different reading. Egypt, of course, we know it's a nationalist government. It's an Arab nationalist government in the tradition of Gamal Abdel Nasser, going back to the overthrow of a monarchy, King Farouk, back in the 50s, I think. And currently, a very strong contention or tension between the religious establishment, which is pretty much the clergy, who submit or is in submission or subservient or subordinate to the political head of the country. So in Sunni Islam, the head of the country is not necessarily a pious or a religious or a committed person to the Qur'an. In Sunni countries, the head of the country is just, Joe Soap. And that is what Shafi'i fiqh in fact calls for, is that the only qualifications to be the supreme or the head of a Muslim country, which is the president or the king or whatever, is to be a Muslim. You don't even have to be a practicing Muslim. You don't even have to be a good Muslim. Yeah, so that is the difference between Egypt and Iran. In Iran, the leader, in fact, has to be a practicing, highly committed Muslim person, but also not lacking in political understanding and awareness. And that is what they call the wilayatul faqih. It is the leadership, the supremacy, the overlordship or the guardianship or the kingship of the wise man, of the philosopher. Now, the system that Iran uses, wilayatul faqih, is not dissimilar to ancient ideas that were prevalent before Islam even. And it was Plato who postulated the idea of the philosopher king. And in Plato's Republic, in the work of Plato, which is termed the Republic, he in fact postulates or suggests that the ideal system, political structure, is one where the most wisest people, the most moral people, in other words, the philosophers of his time, which we would refer to as the religious or the committed religious or religious intellectuals, that they should be at the helm of society. And he calls it the philosopher king. And pretty much Western Europe or Europe for many years, the Byzantine Europe, the Europe of Roman Catholicism, especially Roman Catholic Europe, gave expression to that dream of Plato when the Pope became the highest authority in Europe, and Europe became a form of a dictatorship or a rule of the philosopher, of the clergy. So that's where Iran is. Now, Iran, if we look at our Qur'an and the way that Qur'an prescribes leadership or kingship, then we have a few examples to look at. We have the rule of Solomon, we have the rule of David, and we can, from those people, Dawood is, of course, a saintly man. Dawood, or David, is a spiritual man. David, if you look at the Psalms of David, then these are obviously the utterances and the words and the reminiscences, what can we call, the reflections of a very deeply spiritual man. And so the examples we have in the Qur'an and also from our own Prophet Muhammad alayhi salam is that the leader, the ruler, is one that should be imbued with the highest level of morality, with the highest level of love and concern or commitment for the people. And that injustice is not a feature of a ruler. In fact, Allah says, there's a verse in the Quran where Allah speaks about those who are oppressed, who will inherit the earth. And then the verse is almost like there's a parameter slapped on it. Those who are oppressed will inherit the earth, except those who are oppressors. So in God's vision for the world, for the earth, for mankind, for humanity, the oppressor does not ever have the right to rule. So we can then link the Qur'an and the teachings of the Qur'an, the idea of Dawood, of David, of Solomon, of the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salam, of Musa, that the ruler, the king, must come from those who are just, who are spiritual, who are enlightened, who are fair, and then washawirhum fil amr, and those who will consider their people in making their decisions, who will deliberate, who will consult with their people instead of being autocratic dictators. So basically the system in Iran is very, very much an attempt to give vent to the idea of the philosopher king, or the wilayat al-faqih, the wilayat of the noble religious man. Right. Now let's move on. Do they succeed? Are they succeeding in creating a just society? Well, as I said to you earlier, the bigger picture is the absence of poverty, the absence of sexualization of women, the absence of mental illness in society, the generally, sense of that people are able to access a fairly decent life. Here comes a point that I find that they need to still figure out, which they haven't quite figured out yet. And that is, to what extent do you legislate righteousness? You see, you can legislate righteousness at a political level, at a social level, at a civic level. You can legislate what is true, what is good, what is well-founded. Can you legislate personal morality? That's the big question that I'm sitting with. Can you legislate personal morality? You can certainly encourage it. You can certainly discourage it, the wrong types of personal behavior and morality. But can you really legislate the personal morality that comes down to personal appearance, personal choices, etc.? I don't think so. I don't believe that you can you can make a person spiritual who is not spiritual, because Allah says in the Qur'an, Allah is the one who guides. Hidayah comes from God. And certain levels of decision, certain levels of choices are just purely the nature of the individual. The state can encourage it. The state can create the macro environment that discourages sexual deviancy. The state can create the macro environment that discourages financial crimes. You see, the state can create the macro environment. But as an individual, I don't think it is possible to change people's personal choices. Yes, you don't have to condone it. I'm not saying that you must condone it. Like, I made videos on, let's say, homosexualism. In no way should any sane Muslim government that is committed to the Qur'an be encouraging that type of behavior, or allowing it to be promoted in society. But as for people's personal, private deviancies, which they are hell-bent on engaging in, I believe that it's very difficult to criminalize it, and I even believe you cannot criminalize it. So you need to have a process of discouragement, of education, but you cannot criminalize it. So there's no killing or hanging or throwing of buildings, that I don't see that in the Quran. And so that is where I think the revolution or Islam or Iran has to figure out these things still, because they're still very much on personal morality, legislating personal morality. Like, for example, the wearing of the scarf also. So if your idea is that it is compulsory to put a scarf on your head, you find that to be the moral position, it's very difficult to then go and make that a law in society. You see, the Qur'an promotes modesty. The Qur'an promotes not sexualizing women, not acting in a way that draws attention to the the sexual aspects of them. And so at least not to make a common display of it. Obviously there's times when it's fine to make a display, but there are times when it's not good for a woman to make a sexual display of herself. And so that is the message coming from the Mus'haf, from the Qur'an. But then to say that my reading of the Mus'haf is that there should be a scarf over the head, it should cover the head, it should cover the whatever. Now you are legislating beyond what I think the authorities or the rulers should be legislating. And that is really my main criticism, is that, and I do believe they will figure it out, because I'm generally have a sense that they are open about many things. And, so let me come to the last point that I want to mention this. And that is the idea of Hadith versus Qur'an. And, of course, I spent a lot of time in Sunni countries. I'm still resident in a predominantly Sunni community. And so how does the idea of Qur'an, Sunnah, Hadith, and all these things, how do they play out in Iran? Now, let me firstly say that Iran is the one, almost, I think, 90% Ithna Ashari, 12 Shia community in the world. And they follow a brand or a particular reading of Islam, which is the Shia reading. Now that's slightly contrasted with the Zaidi Islam, because Zaidi Islam is pretty much in the middle between the Ithna Ashari and the Sunni. Zaidi Islam, and I've always mentioned to you from the beginning, you can go check out my first videos a few years ago, that my understanding is that the one expression that is closest, if there's one madhab, I believe that is still closest to the original vision of Islam, then it is the Zaidi Shi'i vision of Islam, right? And I've said that, and not that I'm identifying as a sect, because I hate the idea of sects, but by reading the content and the philosophy and the understanding, I maintain that position, right? The Ithna Ashari expression of Islam has a very powerful Persian touch to it. And the Persian touch that I want to refer to is the centrality of and the heroism of leadership figures. Now, in Ithna Ashari Shi'i Islam, there is a powerful centrality, there is a centrality, a prominence of the heroic historical figures. So heroic figures are placed right at the center. Now, I'm not here to judge. Who am I to judge? But that is one area that might feel uncomfortable for somebody who's not used to it. Maybe if you're a Roman or a Westerner, where humans are also fairly central, the iconic figures are very central in worldview. We know that in America, the centrality of iconic figures, the star system in Hollywood. Now, I think Iran has a similar star system, right? It brings up and it resurrects and it revives and it maintains the people that are central to its own history. And with the demise of ancient, Zoroastrianism, or like the marginalization of it, I think Islam has been reformulated to express that kind of Persian ethos, the centrality of certain important figures. But while saying that, we must be careful not to just outwardly condemn it. It might not be comfortable, but having been to the shrines, some of the shrines, I picked up some of the literature there and I looked at some of the prayers inside those shrines, and nothing in those prayers actually can comprise a form of shirk, you see. And definitely by declaring somebody a hero and by building a big shrine or a mausoleum, that's only the Salafis that make that shirk. Shirk is compromising the authority of God with a man. And the real shirk, or the real compromise of God's authority, is happening in the Sunni world. Yes, I maintain that. Where the kings are ruling against Islam, where the authority of the kings are opposing the authority of God, where the authority of God is indeed compromised by the authority of the kings and the clergy and these people. By building a big mausoleum is only a compromise in the eyes of those Wahhabi Salafists. And I want to make it clear to you that just because people do certain cultural things and because it looks strange to you, it doesn't make it shirk. Doesn't make it compromising God. If you stand in that gravesite and you pray to that person, yes, that would be shirk. That would be a compromise. If you say to the grave there, please grant me health, please grant me, whatever, or you accept the rules of the clergy in distinction, in contradistinction, or in opposition to the rules of God, that is the type of shirk, you see, that we're talking about. But I was in those shrines, I looked at the prayers, I listened to the prayers, and the prayers would go something like this. This would be a typical prayer. It would be veneration, right? Veneration is part of it, and veneration takes the form of dear daughter of the Prophet, dear sister of the Imam, dear so and so. That is the addressing of the shrine. And there's nothing wrong with saying to somebody, dear this or dear that. You can say to your mother, dear mother, I hope you forgive me for what What's wrong with it? It is a feeling that you're expressing in your heart. And if that is offensive to you, well, that's your problem. The tone of these prayers would be, dear daughter of the Prophet, may God guide me through your example. May God inspire me through your sacrifice. And that is the tone of the prayers. And none of those prayers that I read, and I picked them up and I read the prayers because they printed on cards, said that, dear Fatima, or dear, sister of the Prophet, please help me, please relieve my problem. None of that. So that is the nature of the prayers. And so I cannot say, the Qur'an says, when you travel abroad, investigate carefully and don't say to anyone, you are not a Muslim. So my friends, in summary, although we might find the practices, you might find it excessive, the veneration of the great central leadership figures, recent and long and past, might find it uncomfortable. I can tell you now that is a method, that is a mechanism that the population uses to rally itself around. Now, yes, you can say, but why don't they rally around the Qur'an? Why don't they rally around Allah? Yes, that's your thoughts. That's your thoughts. Those people are more Qur'an orientated than those Arabs that I've seen in Saudi Arabia and in other Arab countries. Absolutely. They are more committed to Islam. Now, let's talk about the Hadith. You see, in Iran, there's an absence of Hadith culture. there is no hadith culture, which is very refreshing. You know, in Muslim, in Sunni countries, like in my society also, you see a guy climbing the pulpit on a Friday and then reads a bunch of hadiths and then takes out a verse from the Qur'an. And every verse from the Qur'an is generally also couched in hadith terms. What is very refreshing is that the Shi'i or the Ithna Ashari does not have a hadith culture. They have a culture of scholarship, right? They have these big guys with the big turbans, and they are really the philosophers, the thinkers, and they would make sense of any hadith, whether it's in a Sunni book, whether it is in a Shi'i book, and they would add to that rational reasoning and understanding. So what was very refreshing was that the Qur'an is read more in its own right, without being couched in hadith terms, with the result that many of the things that we find very sacred here, very sacred as Sunnis, are actually not that sacred. Dress code, people are dressed, according to what they like, men, women, all of them. Modesty, of course. All other aspects of society. You see, it's generally not choked with little micro practices like you must say this when you do this, you must do that when you get up, you must do this when you go to sleep. They are not choked by the hadith culture, my friends. And that is a massive relief to have seen also, is that there is more of a there's actually a religious presence without a sort of a ritualistic emphasis. So the religious understanding is there, the idea to be just, to be honest, to be fair, but the ritual aspects are less. So you don't find people walking around with these toothbrush sticks and with certain weird outfits and with crazy beards that are unkept and untidy. And for me, that was a massive relief to see that the whole hadith culture is not present there. And there's definitely, the Qur'an is present in the sense that honesty, fairness, right, is pretty there. They're not a nation of angels. You get conned by a taxi driver who wants to overcharge you. So if I'm trying to make them sound like a nation of angels, then forgive me, that's the wrong impression I'm creating. Ordinary people who are trying to do the right thing, and that is what I saw there. The religious establishment, the rulers, the philosopher king, which is the Wilayatul Faqih, which is at present Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, they need to figure out a lot of things. I think they need to get out of people's little personal moral choices. Like obviously, dishonesty can't be acceptable, but there are certain personal choices that they need to let people do what they want to do, unless it is something that is harmful to the rest of people. But I do believe if you create the correct macro environment, healthy macro environment, those things will not flourish. Those poor moral choices will not flourish. They will not grow. They will not spread because they don't really make sense, you see. And so they will happen, but they will happen as in isolated cases. So I do believe that is where they are at. Macroeconomics, finally, I think I agree with Imran Hussein on this point, that Iran has not figured out macroeconomically how to run an economy on the basis of the Qur'an. And I think the way that they still inflation in the country, there's still speculation on the currency, there is still private ownership and not individual ownership, because there's a difference in Islam. There's a difference. The land belongs to the living, the dead, and the unborn. And we need to legislate to accommodate the rights of the living, the dead, and the unborn. And we need to structure the economy also to benefit the living, the dead, and the unborn. So we cannot bring inflation as a central part of the economy. Inflation is a form of theft. Inflation is theft. And if you have any central bank that prints money, they are stealing from the people who have already used that currency. You see, if I have a 50 riyal and I can buy 10 loaves of bread with that 50 rial. And the government then goes and prints another, 10 or 20,000 of that bill, of that 50 rial. I will no longer be able to buy 10 breads with that money, which means they've stolen my buying power of my money. So central banks that print money is a crime. And that is why Imran Hussein continuously calls for the institution of money with intrinsic value. Money with intrinsic, that has intrinsic value, such as silver coins or gold coins, or at least money such as, Bitcoin, that is linked to a particular tangible asset. Right? So if you want to link money to that's a form of bartering. You see, if you want to link your house to, or the property or the real estate to a currency, or link oil like Venezuela has been trying to do, or like Zimbabwe has linked the currency to gold and has nipped inflation in the butt. And so I think Iran still needs to figure that out. And then I think there's a bit of an infatuation still with the Western economic structure and system, which I think they also will figure out. So that's my summary of the visit that I had to Iran. And, hopefully the experiences, the lessons I've learned, I'll be able to incorporate it in my further research and investigation into the Qur'an and how to make the Qur'an relevant to us.